but it's about really with the Leaders Club, how people take on a challenge which makes no sense at all. As we know that the last steam engine was in 1960, the Evening Star, one of the great 9Fs, and that was going to be it. And there were so many of them were shredded in time. The great restoration societies have done lots to keep old locomotives in place, but it's a wonderful pleasure to see you here tonight. And I've known Steve Davies now for a few years. When I remember in about 2012, I wrote to him as director of the National Rail Museum and pitched the idea of the Leaders Club. And for one reason or another, he said, it sounds interesting. We've been great friends ever since. But this is about the A1 Trust. There's nothing more that you need to hear from me. Steve Davies and David Champion, over to you, gents.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name's Steve Davies and I'm the chairman of the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust, and to my right, 2 meters away, is David Champion, one of our presidents, and David was in at the very start of this amazing project. I hope there's a couple of things you'll take away from this presentation tonight. First of all, a sense of what imagination and grim determination will do to make things happen. Secondly, please dispel the idea that we're a bunch of business. It's a highly professional organisation, and one has to be highly professional when you're operating locomotives at high speed on a main line. And as a consequence, this is, although it's a trust and the board is voluntary, we have a significant number of paid employees, and we deliver a very professional product. So what I'm going to do first of all is hand over to David to talk about the origins of the organisation. Next slide.
Well, good evening. Here we are. Here's Arthur Peppercorn. Arthur Peppercorn, designer of the A1 class Pacific steam locomotive, 49 top-linked locomotives for post-war express work, following on from the work of Sir Nigel Gresley. And here we've got an A1 Pacific in its prime in the 50s and early 60s on the best of post-war expresses. And next we should be seeing one of the A1s on the T-type Pullman, one of the crack expresses of the 1950s and up to the mid-1960s. And sadly, they were all thrown away in the mad rush toward dieselization in the 1960s, and this is the last one to survive, St. Mungo, that lasted just a year or two longer than the rest, but they'd all gone by 1966. And we have, sadly, one of the ones been scrapped after a working life of only 15 years. When you consider that, you know, the high-speed train is still running, that came in the 1970s. railway locomotives have a very long life, but they only had a working life of about 15 years. Now, back in 1965, around about 1965, I had the idea that it was inevitable that there would be new steam locomotives built to fund the railway heritage movement, the various preserved locomotive lines, and also for rail tours. And I waited around for quite a long time for somebody else to do it. And I waited and waited. And then in 1990, there was a letter to Railway magazine voting, building a brand new A1. And I thought, this is where I get in. There was no longer a question of waiting for somebody else to do it. Unless I got off on the backside, it wasn't going to happen. So I spent some time thinking of what the organisation should be, because it was the largest project that ever been tackled. And I decided it had to be something completely different because of the scale of the project. We'd have to have the best of British engineering, up-to-date manufacturing methods. It would have to be run by professional people doing voluntarily what they normally do for a living. I wanted it to have charitable status, so we could reclaim gift aid on it. But most of all, we needed a very simple, easily understandable and affordable funding system that could be understood by anybody. And here on the screen you have the results of a brainstorm one evening. I'd been ruminating for several months as to how we actually could do it. And one summer's evening in 1990, at the end of a particularly good bottle of red wine, I went into the study, and within 20 minutes, I actually managed to get all these principles down. And you see actually on the screen just the last bit of the business proposal that was on a sheet of A4 paper, both sides, mind you, and realized that actually we could build a brand new A1 for the price of a pint of beer a week, as long as we got enough people to do it. And I was convinced that this would work, and it did, and we're still using those basic business principles now. And here we have an early planning meeting in my office in the early 90s. An awful lot of planning before I actually got down to cutting metal, and we had a formal launch of the project on 17th November 1990, where I looked considerably more youthful. And construction started in 1994. So if we can go on to the next slide, which shows actually that Dorothy Mather, the widow of Arthur Peppercorn, the chief engineer of the LNER, who actually designed the A1s, and she's pressing the machine that would cut the mainframe plates. And she was a splendid lady. She only died just a couple of years ago, and she was a great support of the trust. Here we see the cutting through the frame plates. The frame plates are 1.5 inches thick, and each plate was 50 feet long. And in the next slide, we will see the frame plates actually being assembled. So, in other words, for the frames is, it's the chassis of the locomotive. And just a little later, we stuck some brand new 6'8" diameter driving wheels underneath the locomotive. An enormous amount of engineering and £500,000 before we actually get to this stage. And then as construction moved on, we gathered a good construction team around us, and there you see the tender actually being constructed and outside the locomotive works at Darlington before it's rolled onto a chassis and was painted. Now there's an enormous number of complex parts going into a steam locomotive, and here you have some idea of the many smaller items that are made. All, of course, brand new. Everything on this locomotive is absolutely brand new. We gathered a large number of supporters, all paying at least the price of a pint of beer a week. And here we have some of them actually round the locomotive and during construction. You can see we've actually mounted the cab on the frames there, and we've got the smoke box at the front of the engine, and we also have this RAF nameplates sitting on the side of the smoke box. Yes, and here you can see some precision work going on down locomotive works, and I think it's worth mentioning that we use the best of modern engineering, but we've also retained an awful lot of the traditional skills, which you can see in this workshop around us. Now we had to, well, we didn't have to, but we did go across Germany for the boiler, and there's a very good reason for that. Was one, that the Germans could actually make it within the time frame, and also could make it at a very good price for us. And that's the boiler sitting in down at the locomotive works just before we fitted it to the rest of the locomotive.
I'll just come in at this point. We're currently having 2 more boilers built in Germany, a spare and a new one for our new locomotive. And Meiningen is deep in what was East Germany. And I took this photograph when we were there last year, just to make the point that the people in this works don't seem to realize that the Cold War has ended. So that's on display there now. Next slide, please.
Now, as Tornado runs on the modern railway, it has a great amount of electronics on it for electronic signaling, safety systems, and in fact, it's the only steam locomotive actually fitted with a mobile phone charger. But of course, as is fairly obvious, steam and electronics are mutually exclusive workplaces, but we seem to have found a way of getting them to work together. Here we have some of the electronics being mounted on the locomotive just before it steamed for the first time. And you know that the locomotive was actually in its works grey undercoat there before it got its mainline livery, and it stayed in that undercoat during all the testing. So we get to the stage where we're firing the boiler for the first time, and we've got the first firing of the boiler there. It's just sitting on its frames. The cab's not mounted, and he's the boiler inspector. And you can see that he has a stainless steel mirror on the end of his shovel, and that's so that he can see that everything is fine while the fire is actually burning in the firebox and building up pressure on the locomotive. And so we get to the stage where we're testing the boiler. Rather enthusiastically, this boiler raises steam like nothing else. We did get to the stage where actually the 800 gallons of water that we had put into the locomotive were being gobbled up at an enormous rate. So a phone call went through to the fire brigade. Would you mind coming round with a tender and giving us the benefit of another 400 gallons of water, please, very quickly, if you don't mind. So Tornado is now a live locomotive. It's got fire in its belly and it's capable of moving. And this gives you an idea of the complexity of the controls inside the driving cab. And we're then in a position to go to the first moves. I'm pleased to say that there's Peter Townend in the driving cab, actually driving the engine up and down and outside the workshop here on the first day. Now, what's interesting about Peter is that he, at a very early age, he became shed master of King's Cross Shed in London, and he actually had a fleet of A1s under his control right up until the early 1960s. And then we had the media round on the first day when we steamed it up and down outside the works. This was televised live on BBC and ITV. It was carried by all the news channels in the UK. It was carried by news channels in the USA, Australia, New Zealand, India, and all around the world.
So following its first runs, the Loco was given a running-in period on a preserved railway and put into its familiar apple green colour scheme, which is probably the public's favourite engine colour. And by royal appointment, and this is one of the great strengths of this organisation, we make friends in high places, and we are pretty impressive, I would say, wouldn't I, at our media profile. And the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, they agreed to name the locomotive. And the royal relationship continued from there, because the palace has agreed that the next locomotive, which is behind me now, this big chunk of metal behind me, is a locomotive called Prince of Wales. And this is one of the things that sets us apart from many organisations, our ability to create a profile that's not just domestic, but is international as well. Move on.
Yes, in fact, the Queen had to give permission for the name.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And this is the royal train actually being hauled by Tornado, and a mightily impressive sight. I'm sure you will agree. So, having built an engine, operated it, got it painted, and been given its name, Tornado, by through the royal family, what do we do with it? Well, fundamentally, we run it, and we run it on the main line. And of course, this engine has to earn money in order to pay for its next overhaul. And in addition to that, we have covenanters who contribute monthly towards the Loco. Now, an engine like this would struggle to earn enough money to break even. It's just not possible with rail preservation. That's why we rely on fantastic supporters who are just desperately keen to see this thing operating. But she's to be seen far and wide across the British network, on passenger carrying trains, and on high-end luxury dining trains. And we have a program that takes us the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, and a particularly favourite haunt of ours is Scotland, with a series called the Aberdonian. And the engine's not just confined to the main line. We go on to preserved railways, and this is a rather atmospheric shot of the engine arriving on the Wensleydale Railway, which is not a million miles from here. And in fact, the next photograph gives you a sense of the drama of the Wensleydale Railway. That is the Loco coming out of Redmire, up what is called the ski ramp. You can see the steepness of the line, but the castle in the background is Castle Bolton, which held Mary Queen of Scots captive prior to her being taken away for execution. Now, so many people get on a train, they see the Loco, they take their photographs, they go back into the carriage. They're either on the line side watching it go by, or they can hear it from the window, but very few actually get a sense of what it's like from the cab. So we're going to show you two clips now, both taken on a run to Edinburgh from York. I filmed both clips, but the first one is of the engine setting off from a water stop at Berwick-upon-Tweed and building up speed. And then Bob will go into a second one, which is to give you a sense of what it's like to travel at high speed from the cab. So Bob, over to you. Roland, please. Now, at the back, of course, are the coaches, and we have a number of partners with whom we operate. And clearly, the high-end dining experience is extremely popular. And this was one of the first-class coaches that we hauled to Edinburgh and back, laid out for Christmas lunch. Next slide, please, Bob. I'm sure you'll agree, as lockdown comes to an end and we've all got tons of money in the bank, we're probably desperate to treat our loved ones to a cracking day out. And at the end of this, I'll be able to tell you how to do that. Okay, Bob, next, please. Very briefly, Tornado, and you'll have worked out that the name is associated with the famous aircraft of that name. And as a consequence, we are very firmly embedded in a wonderful relationship with the Royal Air Force. Next slide, please, Bob. And the next shot is of Graham Bunker James and I at RAF Leeming last year. That our locomotive Tornado had a repaint, and the workshop team at RAF Leeming very kindly refurbished the nameplates for us. And that was Graham Bunker James and I. Graham's our commercial director, taking them back to go onto the locomotive. I think Rick's probably getting quite excited at the prospect. I can see Rick's Peacock Edwards' thumb going up there. Your homeland there, Rick. Next slide, please, Bob. Just to show you, this is the loco stood under the flight path of the very last flight of Tornadoes over RAF Leeming. So let's just watch this. Thanks, Bob. I'll leave Bob and Rick to have an offline conversation later about the geometry of that flight past. We are our loco, the one behind me, Prince of Wales. We have a twinning arrangement now with HMS Prince of Wales, and these were some of the guys from the ship who were our guests, and in fact we've been fortunate to visit them. Next one, please. And our third locomotive will in due course have an army relationship. Now, this is a very capable machine, and very briefly, a couple of years ago, during a 90-mile test run, Network Rail gave permission for the loco to go for the ton. And this was a pretty seminal moment in modern preservation history. Next, please, Bob. And we've got, next is a shot caught virtually at the moment of 100 miles an hour, and highly dramatic, I'm sure you'll agree. Next, please, Bob. And in the next photo, some of our members and guests at the critical moment that the ton was reached. And this hasn't been done on Britain's railways with a steam engine since about 1967, during the last days of Southern Steam. And then finally, on arrival in York, I'm sure the crew, next job, Bob, please. I'm sure the crew would have preferred a pint of beer, but it was a mug of tea that was required. But that was an extraordinary moment which attracted huge amounts of media. We are in great demand also in much broader sense than this. Next, Bob, please. The loco has featured on TV, and not surprisingly, our marketing team take full advantage of this. The loco features in Paddington 2. That's at Paddington. Next, please, Bob. And there was a publicity event in which Kate came along. And of course, the engine can't operate with input from us. And on the next picture, you'll see the guy on the left, very smiling Hugh Parker. Royal Engineers Lieutenant Colonel, who is our operations director, and I think Hugh is on tonight. Next, please. We also were part of that famous Top Gear race to the north involving a motorbike, a car, and Tornado. And Jeremy Clarkson is absolutely filthy, not least because normally the loco has a thing called a slacking pipe in which you can spray water to keep the coal dust down. But because of the overhead wires all the way up, we weren't allowed to use it, so they got filthy. Next slide, please, Paul. We like to do eye-catching things as well, and a few of us were watching the TV when there was a protest in London. I think it was the Black Lives Matter protest, in which the statue of Earl Haig was vandalised. Did a bit of inquiring to find out who the guys were that had cleaned up the graffiti, and it turned out they were members of the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. So we sought out the CO of that regiment, found out who these guys were, and invited them as our guests. So they came out as our guests on a Premier Dining train to Liverpool. But in return, they say, well, do you want us to bring our kit and do some photos for you? And we said, oh, yes, please. So they brought all this gear all the way up to York, and we had a fantastic time. And it was our privilege to reward these guys and make them realize that some people out there love them. Next, please.
Yes. Back in the early 1990s, one of the earlier slides where we show a planning meeting, that was the meeting where David Elliott, as chief engineer, rolled out a 20-foot-long project plan for building Tornado, and we looked at it, and then we looked at each other, and we realized it wasn't just a plan for building an A1 Pacific. We could use the same project plan for project planning any steam locomotive we liked. Well, the obvious choice was the P2 class locomotive. This was a giant of the 1930s. It was very much a celebrity engine of the early 1930s, only eclipsed by the streamlined locomotives such as Mallow. So they were all scrapped by the 1950s. So behind us, here is a brand new one. When it's built, it'll actually be Britain's most powerful locomotive, and construction began in 2013. Now you see the frame plates being christened, and we hope to have that operational within the next few years, and it'll be the most powerful steam locomotive in the United Kingdom.
One of the key things about the P2, Prince of Wales, is that since Tornado was built, the ability to efficiently design has moved on, and we have taken full advantage of computer-aided design and computer simulation to make sure that the steam flows and so on are working well. So a lot of this, which was not available to the Trust when they built Tornado, is being fully exploited. And one of our directors works for Jaguar Land Rover and is a bit of a ninja on this subject. The next two shots are of construction here in this building, and these were produced and actually appeared in the Daily Telegraph. And the Telegraph seems to be very hungry. The Nationals are very hungry for news of what is going on here. And the next is of Ian doing some work in the cab, which is, you can't see it, which is just over there. But it's the complexity of the pipe work and you don't see 90% of the parts of a steam engine when you stand outside and look at it. It's all on the inside. We are still reliant on traditional heavy engineering, of which there is still a capability in this country. And to get that, those are the wrought billets. This is the turning and the milling of those rods. And the next shot is the final product. And we are indeed fortunate that UK PLC is still capable of producing this kind of craftsmanship. As I said earlier, we are engaged in using as much computer-driven design aids as we possibly can, and that is quite extraordinary shot, a diagram of the front bit of the loco. I promise you there's more of it to the right. The next shot is of the cylinders using a similar one. This shows you the steam flows. The cylinders have had to be redesigned for a variety of reasons, and we are currently using computer simulation in order to check that the redesigned cylinder have the correct steam flow profile. Next. The loco is equipped with an unusual set of valve gear, which is non-standard in this country, designed by a guy called Lentz, and it takes its inspiration, if you like, from the camshafts and the poppet valves you get on top of a car engine. So this is part of the valve gear, and the next shot shows you where that thing fits into the cylinder block. Now, you don't have to be an expert to understand it, but the next simulations will give you a sense of the what I call the hidden beauty of metal that's been engineered into something quite spectacular. So this is the cam box, and if it works, it'll give you a quick breakdown of what's in it. And the next slide, please, Bob, will show you the thing actually operating. Now, as I say, you don't have to understand it, but just appreciate the way in which this kind of design aid utterly revolutionizes the way in which locomotives like this thing behind me can be fabricated. Okay. Thank you, Bob. Okay, let's just go rapidly through 5 more slides. This is the glue that binds us together, and we've got a very sophisticated organization in this respect. We're pretty on top of our game in terms of letting people know who we are, and we're not short of the contacts we need. One of the key things about our board is that everybody is an expert in their respective fields outside this business, and they bring that expertise to bear. We don't have to invent expertise. We've already got it. Next, please, Bob. We obviously are heavily engaged with social media and try to send out consistent messages. Next, please, Bob. Lots of marketing, and you cannot stand still on this. And we need bums on seats with our trains, and but we don't just operate our own trains. Our loco is hired also by other people's operating companies to haul their trains on the network. The key to our success is a very close relationship with our covenanters and contributors, and we have a large number of people who monthly have a standing order, and it ranges from a straightforward donation, one-off donation, through to sponsorship of a component, through to joining one of our many clubs. So we break down the component parts of the engine into clubs. So we've got a cylinder club, we've got what's called the pony truck club, we've got a boiler club, and people can see where the money is going. And we do our very best to make them feel part of the family. Next, please, Bob. And finally, our own internal communications, three journals. Mikado Messenger, focus on the P2. Mikado is the name of the wheel arrangement. You heard the word Pacific earlier, which is the wheel arrangement of Tornado. We've got the Tornado Telegraph, and these are regularly coming out, which focuses on that. And then the Communication Cord is our journal, which is extremely detailed and is eagerly awaited by our supporters. Next slide, please.
Well, planning's now at a very advanced stage for our next project, and there's another Gresley locomotive, a smaller one. It was Sir Nigel Gresley's final masterpiece, completed just shortly before he died. Only 2 of them were produced, and they were superb machines. And where does this fit into the ranks of what we have at the moment? Well, it's a go anywhere locomotive. It's a lighter locomotive, but it can go anywhere that Tornado and Prince of Wales can't. So it can go to Fort William, it can go down the Cambrian coast, and all those lighter lines that our heavier locomotives can't reach. So it opens up extremely exciting possibilities for future rail tours, perhaps going out from King's Cross and big engines, and perhaps changing at York to another big engine, and then to a lighter locomotive to take it somewhere really nice.
It's a thought to savor, isn't it, David?
Yeah,
it is. Okay, and our penultimate point. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our presentation, and it would be wrong of us not to promote what we do. And we are offering exclusively to Leaders Club members 10% discount on all classes of travel and that includes the Premier Dining, but not when we pull the Belmont British Pullman, because that's out of our control, and another train called the Northern Bell, which are very high end. But everything else that is on our website, and you can see that website link there, which takes you to the list of trains that we're operating. Our first one this year is on the 22nd of May. And I'm sure that Stephen will be circulating this presentation later. At the moment, to get that discount, you just have to mention the Leaders Club if you make a phone booking. But we don't have the means to electronically apply that discount. It would have to be a phone booking. So, final slide, please, Bob. In summary, we are not what the Railway Heritage organisations used to be, enthusiasts in anoraks, in wet fields, surrounded by mud, trying to repair engines in the rain under plastic sheets, getting sodden and wet, but thoroughly enjoying ourselves. We have brought steam into the 21st century. And as the likes of Flying Scotsman and all those other engines get older and older, and it's sobering to think we are approaching the 100th birthday of Flying Scotsman, and it's still on the main line, the future must be fresh metal. And we are setting the scene, we believe, to ensure steam survival on the main line. No family stands on a platform and smiles and cheers and waves when a diesel or electric comes through, but by golly, this makes their day when they see one of these things come through. Ladies and gentlemen, David and I thank you for your tolerance and forbearance. The numbers don't seem to have dropped. And over to you, Bob or Steve. Thank you.